Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Jim Gordon, as you likely know by now, founder and executive director of the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. And my guest this week, my friend who's with me this week is Tara Brach. And we're going to be having a conversation about her new book, Trusting the Gold. And as Tara suggested, we'll see where the conversation takes us. Tara is a remarkable human, and Tara, it's beautiful to have you here with me.
Oh, delight. Really happy to be here.
So we're going to start, as we always do, with a couple minutes of soft belly breathing to help bring us into this moment, this place, this communion with one another. So let's just sit comfortably. And I noticed I've changed my position when I said sit comfortably. And I invite you to do that as well. Sit in a way that feels really relaxed and easy for you. And I always suggest closing your eyes if you feel comfortable with that, to remove a great deal of external stimulation. And breathing slowly and deeply in through the nose and out through the mouth, with our bellies soft and relaxed. And remember, this is a concentrative meditation. So we're concentrating on the breath coming in through our nose and out through our mouth, on our bellies softening and relaxing, and on the word soft as we breathe in and belly as we breathe out. If thoughts come, let them come, notice them, let them go. Gently bring your mind back to soft belly. Just a couple of more slow, deep, soft belly breaths. Okay, let's open our eyes. Let our attention come back in the room. So welcome, Tara, again, and welcome, everybody. I'm going to introduce you briefly, Tara, because one of the things about your work that's so extraordinary is that we get to know you through your work. You have an extraordinary ability both to present eternal truths and to ground them in personal experience, including, I think most importantly, your own personal experience. Tara, for those of you who don't know her, she's a clinical psychologist and the founder and guiding teacher of the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, where I live. And when I've been there at her Wednesday evenings, the place is full. Hundreds and hundreds of people are there because Tara is such an extraordinary teacher. She's written a number of books that are justifiably, widely, and well known: radical acceptance, true refuge, radical compassion. And I have to say, and these books have all been very popular and they've all been extremely useful, but I love this most recent book of yours, Trusting the Gold. And I love it because it feels like you put on a new suit of clothes, and it fits beautifully, and the colors are gorgeous, and it draws attention to every movement and every word that you say, and the book is wonderfully designed. So Tara, I'd like to we're going to be talking a good deal about the book, but I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got to be this really quite extraordinary teacher of meditation and wise woman, dare I say that, and wise woman who is helping all of us to learn so much about ourselves. How did you start off? Where did you start off? And what happened?
Well, I started off by mistrusting and not seeing the gold. And it's really interesting, this circle round we make in our lives. But I'm aware that the title and the meaning of trusting the gold is really just seeing the preciousness in each being, ourselves included, just really trusting that basic goodness. And so where I started off, and I won't start, well, I was born on a cold winter night, but um, um, if I think of myself in college, because it kind of so much came together there, I was a social activist. My trajectory is I was planning on, going to law school, and I was at the same time studying psychology. So I was, I'd go on these weekends to these meetings and rallies and so on, and it was very vehement, and there's a lot of bad othering, like the enemy's out there, and we were leftists and very passionate. And then I started going on Tuesday nights to yoga classes where I was, trying to, in some ways, work with my own feelings of self-mistrust and doubt and fears and depressions. And I remember one week after yoga class, and we do yoga and sit in meditation. This is up in New England. It was springtime. I was out in that was an evening walking home. The trees were blossoming, and I just stood under a fruit tree, and just became still. And I realized that my body and my mind were in the same place at the same time. And there was a coming together in that, Jim, where there was like this settling and opening, and I felt like the trees and the world were all a part of my heart. And it was such a contrast to that kind of angry, vehement energy of the activism. And I realized if we want to create the world we believe in, where people are loving each other and there's peace on earth, it's not going to come from that energy. And I also realized that this is really what I was needing in my own life, to be more intimate with my own inner life, because I was so at war with myself. My the harsh inner critic was just dominant, whether this was college, I needed to try harder with academics, and I wasn't really showing up in my relationships, and I didn't like my body, and I was just ruthless. So the sum up of this story is that I took a kind of a dramatic 180 degree, and instead of going to law school, I joined an ashram, a spiritual community, and spent the next 10 years really trying to cultivate a sense of presence and intimacy in my inner life, and an ability to respond to the world in a way that was helpful, not angry. So that was kind of a beginnings for me. And I went from the ashram, I felt limitations in the ashram life because it was kind of like climbing a ladder to perfection, to purity, whereas what we really need to do is embrace this messy world with all of our hearts. So I realized that, I need.
I want to stop you there. Say that again because it's so beautiful.
Well, you can find this in a lot of the spiritual traditions where this is a little bit the shadow side of it, is you're striving to be more pure, you're striving to be more perfect, you're trying to get to nirvana or get to samadhi or whatever, and truly the peace and freedom comes when we open our hearts without condition to what is right here. And that's the lesson that I still needed from Buddhism, where I went from kind of ashram living, where there was a kind of striving in the practice,
Mm,
to a practice that was certainly had the dimensions of training us to quiet our minds and become clear and lucid and present. But it was really about, well, my takeaway from my first retreat was that the boundary to what you accept is the boundary to your freedom. That we really need a heart that really can forgive and accept and love and open, and that doesn't mean we don't act. It's just the precursor to wise action.
mm,
So that was my, I would say that's where I came from really sensing I needed to not be at war with myself, and I needed to, be reaching out to the world, trying to do work in the world from a place of, um, seeing our togetherness and trusting each other more, and not being, such the kind of shadow side of the warrior.
when you say that shadow side of the warrior, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's kind of an aggression that thinks there's an opponent or an enemy out there. It's like when even I'll bring it right to today. I read the newspaper. I don't read the newspaper, actually listen to podcasts, but I'll get the news and I'll sense that very primitive agitation of us them. And, I'm so horrified by white supremacy, and I'll sense, all the efforts towards voter suppression, which is just Jim Crow, Jim Crow, Jim Crow, and get really upset and angry at the agents, the people I perceive as agents. And so I'm springing into that old conditioning of bad person. But then now what I know to do is it's the harm I'm upset about, not a harmful person. And that everybody's got the conditioning towards, ignorance and delusion and hatred and greed and so on. That so not to go into blame. And I have a lot of practices around how to shift from blame to be able to respond in a intelligent way without making somebody else bad. But the essence that I'm really naming here, Jim, is this shift from a kind of a sense of self and world, and that there are bad people or enemies, to we really are all from the same source. There's fear and conditioning that causes pain, and we need to find a way to bridge the differences. That's, the polarization and the mistrust right now is reaching such epidemic proportions, and it has very real consequences in violence. So that brings us really right up to how come I wanted this book out, is because I really feel like then we need to bridge the gap. We to
So
connect.
how do you do that? When you listen to the podcast, you hear what's happening, you hear about white supremacy, the voters restriction. How do you move from that place of anger, outrage, and blame into another place? How do you do it? What is the other place? And because this is a lesson that is potentially so important for all of us if we're going to deal more successfully as well as compassionately with this conflict fraught world that we live in.
Yeah, well, I love the question. What I do is first is I pause and notice, okay, reactivity is here. I never make the anger wrong. I mean, anger is a intelligent emotion like every emotion. It says, hey, there's something here that needs attention. So I don't make it wrong. But I know that if I stay in the storyline of the anger, bad person out there, that there won't be a way to then respond that's helpful. So, what I do is what I call a U-turn, where instead of saying that person that wants to legislate in that way in that state is bad, instead of that, I'll make a U-turn and come back to my anger and I'll feel it. It'll be a felt sense in my body, and I'll give it full permission to be as big as it wants to be in an embodied way. So I can feel the pressure and the heat and, expand. And if I really allow it to be all that it is, what I find is that under the anger, there's fear. There's fear. I'm just afraid of, all the consequences of white supremacy, of continued violation of Black bodies and brown bodies and indigenous people. And so I'm afraid of the continued suffering. And then if I open to the fear, that layer, and really say yes to the fear, be here, let me feel you, I find under that there's a kind of grief. It's a grieving for, the centuries upon centuries of um, horrific violation, And so I open to the grief, and if I stay open to the grief, I find caring, that I care. That's where I need to then act from. It's not like I lose my motivation to act, it's more that I'm then in whatever I do, whether building something into a talk that I give or the kind of activity I have with DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusivity, and accessibility in the organizations I'm in, whatever the work is, I'm coming really energized by the care, not by an anger that makes a bad other. So that's the process that I go through, and I love working it with other people too, and it's never a one shot. I can the very next day be listening to something and whoosh, the same old primitive conditioning. So I'm a work in process.
I'm very glad to hear you say that. One of the things that's so beautiful about you, among many others, is exactly that the feeling and the actuality that this is a work in progress. And I think that's such a powerful message and different from the sort of purely political or purely sort of ashram discipline message that you started off with, is the message that this is the perfection is the way we are, and it's imperfection, and that it's continuing, that it's ongoing, and you're so willing to share that, and I really appreciate it. As you were going through those stages of anger and fear and grief and caring, I could feel myself moving a little bit with you through those
Mm,
stages. But
mm.
you give yourself some time to experience fully each of those. Is that right?
Each It takes time. Sometimes because the good news is well, the bad news is the conditioning keeps arising. It's just the limbic system and we get hijacked and it just happens. The good news is that there's less lag time in terms of recognizing it, and because my neural pathways are trained, I've done this process a lot, it's quicker to come back down to, oh yeah, okay," under anger, there's always something that wants attention, there's something we care about. So I've kind of learned that pathway, and what I find really helpful for myself and others in doing it is that when we get back down to the caring, to pause and sense the quality of presence that's there. Because what we find is that caring presence is more the truth of who we are than any of the stories of the agitated, hurt, oppressed person or, whatever it is. It's like we have all these stories when we're in the anger, but we become much larger and much more spacious, much more kind, much more actually intelligent. We come home more to who we are, and that's the goal. So one of the invitations for anyone that wants to trust the gold is when you do come back home again to a place is more this is more who we are, to actually stay there and get familiar with it. because familiarity, and this is taught on many spiritual paths, getting familiar with the gold, with the goodness, with the compassion, is what allows it to become move from being a passing state to an actually enduring trait. And neuroscience actually shows how that works. So we need to stay with the gold when we do touch it.
Well, one of the issues that comes up when we're working with people who are caring a great deal for other people in their work, whether here in the US or overseas, is the difficulty they have caring for themselves
Yeah.
and the various meanings of that word, both physically caring for themselves, emotionally caring for themselves, and feeling good about themselves. And you have a lot to say about that. So, what are your thoughts? How can you help people whose work is so much focused on caring? How can they care more for themselves as well?
It's really one of the most important questions because there's different kinds of caring. There's empathetic caring where we really are touched by another, and it can actually be burnout because we're touched a lot and it's painful, but we don't have the space and presence to really process it so that we end up being more in reaction than more in presence. And it takes actually being able to train it's affect tolerance really, being able to train with our own, pain so that we really know that it's a difference between really empathy and compassion. Because compassion means that we actually are offering care actively to ourselves. It creates more space and balance in the midst, and then when we're with each other, there's compassion-based empathy. We're with them, but there's that space and that ability to respond from more of that mindful, balanced space. So if I had a long story short, say, if caregivers could realize that caring for themselves is part of what actually deepens the space of the heart space that allows us to hold all of us, it actually serves all of us to be able to pause and pay attention to what's asking for attention inside ourselves. That can be motivating.
That's beautiful and very, very helpful. Um, One of the things that I noticed in reading Trusting the Gold is, and I want you to talk a little bit about it. It's like you've come into another place. It seems to me. I know we're always changing, but this seems like a significant change in you as a teacher, and the wisdom is so clear, and the structure of the book is different from your other books, and the chapters are very brief, and then there are very useful reflections at the end of each chapter, and there are illustrations. So, how did you move into this other mode of teaching, and what's going on, and what's happening right now?
Well, in a way, Trusting the Gold was a totally unintended pregnancy. I did not do what I normally do and take 4 or 5 years to systematically unfold a teaching. Like, for instance, radical compassion, anybody that wants to learn the rain practice, it is a powerful, deep guidebook to that. Trusting the Gold won't do that. It'll just give, just a little practice. So, for anybody that wants to do a deep dive in developing their practice, there is a power to that systematic deepening that the other books offer. This actually, my staff were just plucking people would ask for the stories that they liked the best or the quotes they liked the best, so my staff started plucking them, and then I thought I'd do some informal compilation, but Sounds True convinced me to actually weave it in a deeper way with the theme that matters most to me, which is this, and we found an awesome illustrator, Vicky Alvarez, who just creates in visual form an expression of the teachings. So it came out like that, Jim, more of a kind of unintended, more poetic expression where it just had the discrete pieces that are valuable, but it's not as much of a training book, whereas the others are really for people that want to train on the path, train and practice.
Well, I love it. I mean, I really like the other books too, but this one is just so available, and I think is so available.
Mhm.
People who are, it's kind of, the comparison's a big comparison. Sort of like the I Ching. You kind of open it at a certain place, and you see what the message is for you. I was doing a little bit of that as I was reading it, and I
I
found
would like that testimony somewhere. It's like the I Ching, Jim Gordon. That would help awesomely. Oh, bless you, my friend. Thank you.
yeah. Well, I want to just ask you to sort of do. You have a couple of kind of reflections here, and they relate to what we've been talking about already. And I think they'll give the people who are with us here in this on this webinar a more even more concrete sense of how the book works. So, for example, you say not a problem is one of the reflections. You said, and you want to talk a little bit about how you get to that place, because we're all so preoccupied with our problems. So
It's
what do
so
you
true.
mean when you suggest that we reflect and that not a problem be our motto?
Well, first of all, you're right. This is universal that we humans, our brains are predicting machines, and they're primarily predicting what's going to go wrong. And that's how science would describe it. And this is because we have a negativity bias. We are always trying to make sure we're not going to get caught or blindsided. So what happens is our filter as we go through the day is is what do I have to watch out for? How can I get more comfortable? How can I check things off the list? We kind of set it up as we're trying to get through the hurdles. And there's something radical and refreshing about realizing it doesn't have to have that frame. And in the moment that you ask yourself, well, what would this moment be like if I truly believed or trusted there was no problem right here? There's just no problem right now. And
I
things.
can feel it.
Yeah, yeah, and I remember I got the teaching in a very specific way from Joseph Goldstein, who's a wonderful insight meditation teacher, when he said that, he just whenever he thinks he has a problem, he tells himself there's not one. You know? That's classic Joseph, and so I remember just trying it on, like, it became my practice where I'd be finding my brow furrowed on some level, and I would just say, "This isn't a problem. I mean, it's challenging, it's uncomfortable, there's unpleasantness. It's not a problem." And my mind would have so much more creativity in how to respond, and I remember, and this I wrote about, my siblings and I were going through a kind of tussle around, something to do with family finances. I don't remember exactly the issue, but it felt important then, and and I remember going to retreat, kind of really chewing on this problem, and at retreat, I went, "Oh, yeah, this is not a problem." And it's kind of opened up a space where, first of all, my siblings were back in my heart in the way they always are. They weren't associated with something bad is going on. And I just remember leaving the retreat and getting together with them and somehow or other helping to create a space that we found our way through in a much more easy and trusting and creative way. I've just found over and over again that's what happens when we're able to, in some way, challenge or relax the notion that something is wrong. I mean, it's such a deep thing in our psyche that keeps us small. So, yeah, thank you for asking about that one. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, well, your message comes across through many of these reflections. The message is of a message of acceptance, and one of your books is Radical Acceptance, and that is very much that's a lot of what your teaching is about radical acceptance of each moment and all the emotions and all the difficulties that arise in that. How do you what help do you have to stay in that place you're encouraging all of us to
Mm.
occupy and to find within ourselves that gold of a radical acceptance, in a sense, within ourselves?
Well, and that is the question because in a way our suffering comes from resisting life, period. You know, it's like in any moment that we're tensing against reality, we're out of the flow and we suffer. So there's a beautiful understanding that when the resistance is gone, the demons are gone because the real suffering is, the pain of it's like if you're pregnant and giving birth, tensing against the contractions. So one of the things that helps me a lot is a full understanding of what compassion or acceptance really involves, that it's not passive at all. And that's one of the misunderstandings. When radical acceptance came out, we were about to go to war in Iraq, and I was fervently not wanting that to happen, and I remember the book came out and we had already invaded, and people asked me, "Well, if you're radically accepting things, how do you in some way, protest or, do something about, global warming or the war in Iraq or whatever it is?" And sometimes the image that's most helpful to me, it comes from, Joan Halifax, Roshi Joan Halifax, who I know you know, is strong back, soft front. And acceptance and compassion, there's a strength to it, where there's a real clear seeing of what's going on. There's absolute dedication to taking good care, to having boundaries, to doing whatever we need to do to protect and defend and take care of our lives and the lives of others. So but those qualities have an active kind of strong back quality that allows us to then have a soft front where our hearts don't have to shut down. Our hearts can stay open to the moment, open to each other, so that if somebody is violating me, I can absolutely do whatever I need to stop the violation, but not go into the suffering of hating them. And
Mhm.
so that really helps with it. And the other is what we just talked about earlier with, when I'm sensing white supremacy and I'm feeling angry, the idea is not that I wanna just accept white supremacy. What I'm accepting is my feeling of anger, and I'm accepting what's under that and what's under that, so I can come back home to the place that can then respond effectively. So those understandings really help me.
That's beautiful. As you're talking, I'm not only wanting all of our staff and faculty to see this webinar, but I want you to come around. I want to spend more time, and I want
Aw.
no, and I really appreciate so much what you're saying and who you are to as a kind of tonic for our work as well. Earlier, before we got on the air, I was telling you a little bit about the online international training we're doing with so many people, almost all of them women, who are working with women and girls who've been subject to gang rapes and during wars, rape being used as an instrument of war, and trafficking and childhood marriages. And this is a lot of the work we're doing is we're going into those African and Middle Eastern countries and hoping to develop major programs. And one of the things that you commented on was the importance of connecting with the divine feminine. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit more about that and what that has to do with insight, meditation, and trusting the gold. How do those dimensions come together?
It's all about relationship. That when we're suffering and when we act in violent ways, we have contracted away from feeling our relatedness to each other. We forgot our belonging to each other and to the greater whole. And I really look at the sacred feminine as that principle of complete interdependence, that it's the which is actually the felt sense of it is love. So it's what the awareness perceives as when you and I are talking, we might feel some identification in our body or our role. You're Jim, you're asking these questions, you're talking about the programs you're working. I'm Tara, I'm trying. But even more, what makes the sacred presence, sacred feminine here right now is that you can sense that who's looking out my eyes and I can sense who's looking at your eyes is the same consciousness, and that there's a heart space that grows as we pay attention to it that's more true than any idea of our separate selves. So it feels like if we're to keep evolving as a planet, if we want to save our planet, we have to waken up to that field of relatedness. We have to know it, not just an idea. And that's the challenge. There's more and more people that could say, yes, everything's connected. Quantum physicists will talk about, one of the most deep understandings of quantum physics is that everything is related, that everything interinfluences. People know it, but it's really different when we slow down enough, just as you and I are doing a bit right now, and since it's really true. I mean, we live in a lot of stories about the separate self, but it's really the field of relatedness that is our gold, it's our true identity. So, back to what you're saying, if you're working with people that have been deeply injured, or you're working with the worried well in this country, whoever you're working with, the waking up happens when people feel their belonging. And I know that's what you do in your programs because 'cause we've talked about it, that you really help people feel that you have them breathe together and dance together and share their vulnerability together. That frees us from that sense of, "This is about me. I'm the violated one. I'm the victim, or I'm the bad one." It frees us from that. So
Yeah.
it's relatedness.
And yes, you're absolutely right. That is what we see in our trainings and in our groups, just by having people. And I appreciate you're reminding me again, by people just slowing down and shutting up while other people are speaking and sharing themselves. In this last training we did, there was a sort of ultra orthodox rabbi from Jerusalem who was in my small group, along with a couple of Iranian women.
Wow.
And and as well as people who are working with former child soldiers and people who've been subjected to mass rapes in South Sudan. And the look on this rabbi's face after a couple of
Mhm,
days of the groups, he'd been very skeptical. He said, "I am a man in my head."
mhm.
But being with these women, he said, "This is amazing. These are people I never thought I would be with in my life. And I find myself so open to them. I see they are, Israel and Iran are almost at war, and yet these are my sisters, and I am their brother."
Mm,
So we do this in our
mm.
trainings and in our groups. What are your thoughts about how we can reach out, how anybody who's watching us now, or anybody who's reading Trusting the Gold, how they can bring that more into their life? Hopefully they'll, come to programs that we're offering at the Center for Mind Body Medicine, or maybe to the Inside Meditation community. But what about for the vast number of people who may not do that? How do
Yeah.
they how can you help them right now? Sort of putting you on the spot a little, experience a little more of that relatedness. I experience it with you so clearly here. We're just, I'm about to cry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel the same poignancy and tenderness. So, what you're doing in the world, Jim, is the model that you are getting people of difference and you're giving a safe, protected space. And you have a protocol, which is really important for safety. And then you're inviting them to listen to each other. It's like when somebody I have considered as an unreal other, and that's what I think of for this rabbi you're describing, that the women were, until that time, they were unreal others. They were just ideas and categories in his mind. When you bring together people as you do, and you do it all over the world, that are from different classes and races and different and clashing, and when people can actually quiet down and listen to each other, there's a magic that happens where we start getting, "Oh, just like me, you want to feel safe, and just like me, you wanna feel listened to and understood." And just like me, you wanna feel loved. It's like we start getting that, and that's where we bridge the divide. And sadly, most of us are very comfortable in our own cocoons. I mean, I can see that in my own life, how I can go months and at a time, and I just have my particular people I'm in touch with in certain ways, and our cocoons are generally class-wise and race-wise very, very similar to us, and we need to stretch. We need to stretch for the sake of our own freedom and for the sake of our world, because the divides are getting bigger. I mean, the class divides are outrageous. I run into people that talk about the pandemic being over, and then I say, "Wait a minute," or talk about glad we're over that suffering. And I know so many people, especially my friends of color, who they just say, "Whatever pandemic you experienced, it was different for us. It was a different pandemic, and it is a different pandemic. The amount of loss of life, the amount of loss of income and of viable work, it was utterly devastating." Whereas many people that are middle upper class white people, they managed to get through it. It's disturbing, it's been uncertain, it's been anxious, there's some of the elders have been lost, but nothing of the same devastation. We need to be with people who are having a different experience of life. And I feel like, a real bow to what you do, Jim, because I feel like you are creating those circles and those circumstances over and over again, and we who are more habituated to our cocoons need to stretch, and it might be a stretch that starts really small, where it just starts with somebody who disagrees with us, you know? And it might not even be
That's a good place to start.
yeah,
How do you do that? Give
I
us
don't know,
give
I
us some hints
haven't
about
pulled
that.
it off real well, but that saying that the world is divided into those who think they're right, and that's the whole saying. Um, so yeah, it's hard, and even there, it can be a matter of degrees that we don't go for the extremes right away. It's not like we're trying to get the extreme left and the extreme right to say, "Yes, I see how that could be true for you." You start with people that are in the middle right and the middle left, or you know what I mean? So that but we need to start doing it more, and it is happening. I don't wanna make it sound like it's not happening. I know many different initiatives that in some way are trying to get us to bridge the divide, to learn to see each other, because the magic that happens is not only there are 2 things. When you and I begin to be more real with each other, one thing that happens is I see your vulnerability and I really get that, wow, same vulnerable place in me. We're all living with this fear. We all have fear. We're all going to lose everything. So it's that shared humanity. And the other thing that happens is what I was mentioning earlier, which is when we spend time with each other, we start seeing spirit. We start seeing the soul shine through the gold, you know? So that's the training and that's the practice, spending time with each other in that way.
How does this unfold in the insight meditation community? How do you create the opportunity for that? And it looks like a lot of people are paying attention because a lot of people are watching your podcasts and reading the books. How are you helping? I know you're doing it through the writing, but how is the community building, and what do you see as the next steps, and how can people who are interested learn more? They can come through our trainings or our online groups, and that information will be available at the end of the of our webinar. But how can people connect with you and with your community, and what will how can is your community helping this process to move forward of understanding and of being able to see each other and each other's eyes?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm in multiple communities and I can't represent the Insight community. I mean, that's community. I founded the Insight Meditation Center of Washington, but I'm actually not on the board anymore, and I'm just teaching one class for. So it's like my involvement has shifted. My main involvement actually is doing teacher training where it's the meditation teacher training certification program I do with Jack Cornfield. And we have now 2,500 people from 75 different countries around the world in this training. And that's actually more where we're doing different kinds
Mm,
of work that I'm talking about. So, because it feels really critical that for teachers of meditation to really be seeped themselves in uh, diversity work and inclusivity work and really having that sensitivity to how we are all conditioned to have filters that put other people down or other people up. We're in a racial caste system, and it just stamps all of our psyches. So to be aware of that, we have to be aware of that if we're gonna be sensitive in a group of people that we're teaching, you know? So we're doing a lot with DEIA in that program. We're also doing a lot with it in the Insight Meditation community of Washington, and we have been for 12 years now, with having, uh, what are called affinity sanghas, which are groups of just, Black, indigenous, people of color, and groups of white just really learning to face their own conditioning, and then different ways of people coming together and having, you know, more engagement with each other to see how it's playing out. But I'll name 2 other ways that people can plug in right in the moment. One of them is that I many Saturdays, I have what's called satsang, which is where people come and will meditate, and then people share what's going on for them, and we'll do kind of an inquiry together. And it's several hundred people, but that becomes the community, and people bear witness to what people are going through, and we definitely bring in it has a diverse quality to it. People from all over the world, different races, different ages, different gender and sexual orientations and identities. So it starts opening people to each other of difference in an online way. The other thing that people can do, and I have a lot on this on my website, is what are called rain partners. And this is where you actually practice the rain meditation with a partner. And it's a way of holding a space for each other as we begin. And RAIN is an acronym: recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture, that weaves mindfulness and compassion in a really powerful way to heal difficult emotions. So when people come together as rain partners, they become spiritual companions and they start seeing their differences, but they also see just what you and I are talking about, which is the goal, the oneness that connects us. It's very connecting. So my website has resources for that, and I'm actually doing a rain partner training next month if people are interested.
great.
Yeah.
Beautiful. No, it's wonderful. It's so beautiful because that political activism has been transmuted. There's an alchemical transmutation into the gold of rain and the rain of gold.
Oh, I
It,
love that. I'm gonna have to grab that one. The rain of gold.
oh, it's yours. It's yours.
Thank you, thank you.
One of the things that you do is you give so freely. You inspire giving, and you're in touch with your inspiration, which I believe certainly helps me get in touch with my inspiration. And I hope it does and has for everyone who's been with us for this last 50 minutes or so, that as they get to know you and see you and listen to you and read Trusting the Gold and perhaps join your communities that you're connected with, that process will deepen in themselves. And you do it so beautifully because you are very much the teacher, and you're always teaching us to go inside and to find what we need inside and then to come out again with you and with others. So I'm so glad that you've come out here today.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm so aware as we speak, Jim, that we're actually very much working in the same field, and I can sense that yours is very much. You can see the beauty of the outer, the seeds you're planting everywhere, and it's based on the same principles. It's based on the principles of being able to pause and come into presence, and from presence come into relatedness with ourselves, with each other, and in a really healing way with our world. And my emphasis is the trainings that help us really know how to do that presence. And my prayer is that it not be compartmentalized. I think that for a long time, spiritual life was kind of had that image of off in a cave somewhere. And I see no division between being able to come within our own being and wake up presence and being totally in love with this world and here to serve our world. To me, you can't separate them. So I feel that in both of us.
Thank you. And I feel it in both of us too. And I feel it even more after this time that we've been together. And it makes me want to see you soon. and
Yeah.
and do and I love what you're doing. And I really appreciated your talking a little bit about how things are how you're evolving and changing and your role is. And so yes, we start in similar places and we're winding up in similar complementary and uh, painful and glorious places. So
Mm, beautiful.
thank you so much for being with me. And I hope those who've been watching us will reach out and see, read Trusting the Gold and look at what Tara is helping to give birth to. I think sometimes think of myself as a midwife. And I'm not sure whether you're both the midwife and also the birthing mother.
I'm
That you
also the infant too.
great. I love that. Yeah, I forgot that part of myself. I'm very much that infant too. So thank you. We're just going to close with a minute or two of soft belly breathing and sitting with each other and just appreciating this time that we have had and that we still have. So let's sit for a moment together, breathing slowly and deeply. Relaxing into this moment, into this body. Soft belly breathing with each exhalation, helping us to relax a little more, be a little more present with ourselves and with this moment. Just a couple more slow, deep, soft belly breaths. Open our eyes, come back in the room. I can come back and look at you, Tara, and say goodbye and, well, au revoir, and until we see each other again. And I know that as I keep going back to Trusting the Gold, I'm going to be seeing you in my mind's eye and feeling you in my heart. So thank you. And thank you, everyone who's been with us. Bye-bye.